She thought she was getting married. Instead, she got a war. Rowan Mercer spent 3 years building a life with a man she believed in, and 30 seconds watching him destroy it. Left at the altar in front of everyone who mattered, humiliated in white lace while her own twin sister stepped forward to take her place. But Rowan Mercer doesn't cry. She investigates. And what she found hiding inside her ex-fiancé's financial records was so dangerous, so deeply buried in blood and political money, that men with guns came to make sure she never published a single word. She should have died in that warehouse. She didn't, because something worse than death showed up first. If this story has you holding your breath, hit that like button right now and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because nothing about this is what it looks like. The wedding dress cost $4,000, and it still felt cheap on her. Rowan Mercer stood in the bridal suite on the 14th floor of the Alderton Grand, staring at herself in a mirror framed with gold leaf that somebody had paid too much for, and tried to locate the version of herself that was supposed to be happy right now. The veil was pinned wrong. Her maid of honor, a college friend named Dana who smelled like hairspray and anxiety, kept trying to fix it, kept reaching up with nervous fingers, and Rowan kept tilting her head away without meaning to. "You okay?" Dana asked. "Fine. You've said that 4 times. Then you should stop asking." The suite smelled like stargazer lilies and someone's perfume and the faint chemical ghost of carpet cleaner beneath everything. 200 people were sitting in the ballroom downstairs. Her editor had come. Her mother was down there in a pale blue dress she'd bought 3 weeks ago, her eyes already red at the edges. Rowan had seen her through the cracked door when they'd walked past, dabbing at her face with a cocktail napkin, and the sight of it had produced something strange and hollow in her chest. Not warmth exactly, more like guilt. She'd been working a story for the last 11 days. That was the truth nobody downstairs knew. Even on the week of her own wedding, she'd been running financial records through a forensic accounting contact in Baltimore, cross-referencing shell companies against Port Authority, logs out of Wilmington, Delaware. The pattern she'd found wasn't clean yet. It wasn't publishable. But it was there, underneath the surface of her ex-fiancé's business dealings, like a hairline fracture running through load-bearing stone. Her ex-fiancé. Except he wasn't ex-anything yet. His name was Carter Voss. He was standing downstairs at the altar in a charcoal suit that cost more than Rowan's monthly rent. And she was up here letting Dana try to fix the veil. And in 11 minutes, the string quartet was going to play something classical, and she was going to walk down the aisle toward a man she had started to doubt 4 months ago and had never quite stopped doubting since. She told herself the doubt was noise, the story itch, her editor called it, the professional reflex she couldn't turn off, the way she looked for the seam in everything. She told herself that doubting Carter was just the story itch misfiring, that she was projecting, that loving someone didn't have to look like trusting them completely, that trust was built in increments and they were still building. She'd been very convincing. "Rowan." Dana had both hands raised now, veil pins between her lips, speaking around them. "Your phone's going off. Ignore it. It's been going off for 6 minutes." The phone was on the vanity table beside a glass of water nobody had touched. Rowan looked at it. Unknown number. She picked it up. The text was 4 words and a file attachment. Check the attachment first. She opened it. The document that loaded was a wire transfer record. Clean formatting, time-stamped 14 months ago. The originating account was a holding company registered in Delaware called Vantage Harbor, LLC. The receiving account belonged to a private equity firm she recognized immediately. She'd spent 3 weeks investigating that firm 8 months ago for a story she ultimately couldn't prove. The transfer amount was $2.3 million. She knew the LLC name. Vantage Harbor LLC appeared in 3 of the shell company chains she'd been tracing for 11 days. It was 3 nodes deep, layered behind 2 other holding companies, connected to a shipping logistics operation out of the port of Wilmington that had anomalous cargo manifest discrepancies going back 4 years. She'd flagged it. She'd been building toward it. She hadn't known it connected to Carter's finances. Her hands were very still. "Rowan." Dana was staring at her. "Your face just—" "I need a minute." "We have 8 minutes before—" "I need a minute, Dana." She walked into the bathroom and locked the door. She sat on the edge of the tub in $4,000 of white silk and opened every document she'd forwarded to her personal email in the last 11 days and started cross-referencing. The wire transfer hit a junction she'd mapped 2 weeks ago. Follow the junction forward, it connected to a freight company called Seaward Consolidated. Follow Seaward Consolidated through its operating subsidiary, it connected to a political action committee that had donated $400,000 to 3 congressional campaigns in a single election cycle. All 3 representatives sat on the House subcommittee overseeing maritime trade. Carter Voss owned a 34% stake in Seaward Consolidated through Vantage Harbor LLC. She sat with that for 30 seconds. She made herself breathe. She made herself think like a journalist and not like a woman sitting in a wedding dress on the edge of a bathtub 6 minutes before her own ceremony. Then she unlocked the door and walked back into the suite and picked up her bouquet and said, "Okay, let's go." Dana looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "Are you? Let's go." She walked down the hallway. She took the elevator. She stood outside the closed ballroom doors while the ushers straightened up and the string quartet shifted into position and her heart rate sat at a flat and businesslike 68 beats per minute. The doors opened. She walked. Carter was at the altar. He was handsome the way expensive things are handsome. Composed, deliberate, assembled with care. He watched her come down the aisle with an expression she had always read as love, and now, for the first time, was reading differently, calculating. Managed. She reached the altar. The officiant smiled. Carter reached out and took both her hands. And then Carter Voss cleared his throat and said, loud enough for 200 people to hear, "I'm sorry, Rowan. I can't do this." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. "I should have told you sooner." His voice was steady. Practiced, she thought distantly. He'd rehearsed this. "I've been trying to find the right time. There isn't one. I'm in love with someone else." He released her hands. He turned. Sienna Mercer was standing at the end of the second row in a pale green dress, dark hair down, eyes on Carter with an expression that wasn't guilt or apology or anything Rowan could have named. She was Rowan's exact face. Same jaw, same dark brows, same mouth. And she was looking at Carter Voss like she'd been waiting. Carter walked toward her. Sienna took his hand. "We're engaged," Carter said to the room. Rowan didn't move. 200 people turned to look at her. She felt their attention like pressure against her skin, like a drop in air temperature. She heard her mother make a sound somewhere in the third row. She heard Dana say her name from somewhere behind her. She stood at the altar in a $4,000 dress holding a bouquet of flowers she'd picked herself, and she looked at her twin sister's face, her own face, and she felt something very cold and very precise slide into place behind her sternum. Not grief, not humiliation, suspicion. Because Sienna wasn't looking at Carter like a woman in love. She was looking at Carter like a woman who had just completed a transaction. Rowan set her bouquet on the altar. She walked back up the aisle. She didn't run. She made it to the parking garage before she let herself lean against a concrete pillar and breathe. And even then it was controlled breathing. In through the nose, 4 counts, out through the mouth. She'd learned that from a source who'd survived federal witness protection. It was what you did when the situation outpaced your nervous system. Her phone was still in her hand. She opened her email. She forwarded every document she'd compiled in 11 days to 3 separate secure cloud accounts. Then she called her editor. Marcus Webb picked up on the second ring. He was 62 years old and had the phone manner of a man perpetually in the middle of something more important, which was usually accurate. "You're supposed to be getting married," he said. "I need to file an extension on the Wilmington piece." Silence. Then, "What happened?" "I found a connection I didn't have before. Carter Voss owns equity in one of the shell companies in the chain." Another silence. Longer. "Rowan, are you—" "I'm in a parking garage in a wedding dress, Marcus. I'm not fine, but I'm telling you the story just got bigger and I need more time to build it properly." "Take the time," he said. Then carefully, "Do you have a place to stay?" She hadn't thought about that. The apartment she'd moved most of her things out of was now sublet to a graduate student. Carter's place, she obviously wasn't going back there. She had a storage unit in Fells Point with her reporting files and a duffel bag of work clothes she'd never gotten around to moving. "I'll figure it out," she said. She changed in a gas station bathroom near I-95, pulling jeans and a gray Henley from the duffel she'd had the foresight to leave in her car trunk. She balled the wedding dress up and put it in a plastic bag from the gas station and left it in the bathroom trash. She probably should have felt something about that. She mostly felt the cold, functional clarity of someone who has been handed a piece of information they don't fully understand yet and has decided to understand it. She drove to a motel off the interstate. She bought a prepaid laptop charger and a gas station coffee, and she sat at the desk in a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and spread her files across every available surface and started building the story properly. 3 weeks went by. The connection between Carter Voss and the Wilmington shipping irregularities held. She found 2 more intermediary companies she hadn't seen before, one registered in Nevada, one in the Cayman Islands, and traced both back to the same network of freight logistics operations. The anomalous cargo manifests weren't random, they were systematic. Specific container shipments out of Wilmington matched to specific dates that aligned with political donation cycles. She had a source at the Port Authority, a mid-level compliance officer named Greg Harlan, who was frightened enough to talk in short, paranoid bursts and careful enough never to put anything in writing. What he told her over 3 separate meetings in a diner near the Delaware Memorial Bridge was enough to connect the shipping irregularities to something worse than tax evasion or campaign finance fraud. "They're moving people," he said, on the 3rd meeting, hunched over bad coffee, eyes on the door. "Not drugs, not weapons. People. I saw a manifest that didn't match any cargo registry I could find. Container-marked agricultural equipment. The weight was wrong. The ventilation modifications were wrong. I reported it internally. 3 days later, I got a performance review that said I had judgment issues. He hadn't been willing to go on record. She hadn't pushed. She had enough to keep building. She was 2 weeks from publishable when she got the call from an unknown number. Different number than the wedding day text, but the same blocked origination, telling her that the people whose operation she was investigating knew her name, knew her motel, and knew she was 3 days from talking to a second Port Authority source she'd been cultivating for 6 weeks. She'd been warned before. It came with the territory. She'd published stories about pharmaceutical executives and defense contractors, and a city comptroller who'd embezzled from a public housing fund. People threatened journalists. Most of them were bluffing. She went to meet the second source anyway. His name was Deliveries. That was the contact name she'd stored him under, a paranoid habit she'd developed for sources she didn't fully trust. In real life, he was a freight dispatcher named Aldous Keene, who worked for Seaward Consolidated's operational arm and had reached out through a chain of 3 intermediaries, which either meant he was genuinely terrified or he was a plant. He designated the meeting location, a warehouse district off Route 9 near the Newcastle waterfront, industrial area, mostly decommissioned facilities, the kind of place that made a journalist nervous for obvious reasons, and that she went anyway because the alternative was sitting on a story about human trafficking while the people running it kept operating. She got there at 11 p.m. The parking lot outside the warehouse was empty. The building itself was dark, its roll-up doors closed, no light visible through the high transom windows. She parked on the street, not in the lot. She called Marcus and left a voice message telling him the address. She turned her GPS location sharing on for 3 contacts: Marcus, her personal attorney, and a digital security contact she trusted. Then she got out of the car. She got 20 feet from the building's side entrance when the first flashlight found her. Then a second. Then 3 more. They came from 3 different directions simultaneously. 2 from behind parked freight containers to her left, 1 from the far end of the building, 1 from the roofline above the entrance. The men holding them weren't identifiable. Dark clothing, face coverings, no insignia. 4 of them visible. Maybe more she couldn't see. One of them said, "You've been making people very nervous, Ms. Mercer." She did not run. Running was instinct, and instinct was wrong. They had every exit line covered. She did the only thing she could do, which was stay still and catalog. 4 visible. Movement behind the left freight container suggested a 5th. The roof position was too elevated for a close quarters grab, which meant it was for cover fire if things went wrong. They hadn't pulled weapons yet, but she could see holsters on two of the visible figures. "I'm a journalist," she said. Her voice was level. She needed it to be level. "My editor knows this address. My attorney knows this address." "We know," the nearest man said. He was 5 feet away now. "Doesn't change anything." Then headlights erupted from the far end of the parking lot. Not one vehicle. 3. No. 4. Large, dark SUVs moving fast, spreading into a formation that cut off the warehouse exits on 3 sides. And from the way they moved, they were not a panicked response to her location sharing. They knew exactly where to go, and they'd been staged nearby, which meant they'd known this meeting was going to happen before she did. The men around her scattered. Not all of them. 2 broke for cover. 1 moved toward her. 1 stayed at position. The SUVs were still moving when the first one's passenger door opened while the vehicle was in motion, and a man stepped out with a control and precision that her journalist's brain immediately logged as tactical training, military, or something adjacent to it. He was tall, dark coat. He moved toward the man who'd been moving toward her, and what happened next was brief and efficient and violent in the way that real violence is. Nothing cinematic about it. Just 2 seconds of motion that ended with the man in dark clothing on the ground and the newcomer standing over him. He looked up at her. She could see his face in the headlights. Mid-30s, dark hair, close cut. A jaw that looked like it had been hit before and absorbed it. Eyes that were doing the same thing hers were. Cataloging, calculating, moving across the scene. "Rowan Mercer," he said. Not a question. Not a, "Who are you?" Someone who's been watching this meeting for 2 days. He glanced at the man on the ground, then back at her. "We need to go. Right now." "I'm not going anywhere with—" One of the men she'd lost track of appeared from behind a freight container 10 feet to her left with something in his hand that she registered as a weapon. And then the man in the dark coat moved in front of her and something loud happened and the man behind the container went down. Her ears rang. "Now," the man in the dark coat said, very quietly, and his hand was on her elbow. Not gripping, just present. A direction rather than a command. She went. She processed it later in the back of the SUV with the doors locked and the vehicle moving at a pace that was fast without being conspicuous. That the choice to move when he touched her elbow had been instinct, and that her instincts had been right, because the alternative was a warehouse district with men who knew her name and had come to end her access to the story permanently. There were 3 other men in the vehicle. None of them spoke to her. The man in the dark coat sat beside her and looked straight ahead. "Roman DeLuca," he said, after 4 minutes of silence. She recognized the name. Most people in her profession who covered organized crime at any depth recognized the name. The DeLuca family had controlled significant portions of the Eastern Seaboard's organized crime infrastructure for 3 decades. Labor unions, freight logistics, political influence, enforcement. Roman DeLuca was the current head of the family. She'd seen his name in federal indictment documents she'd pulled as background research. He'd never been charged. Nobody could make anything stick. "You pulled me out of a situation," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her then, and there was something behind his eyes that she couldn't immediately name. Not warmth, not menace, something older than both. "Because you're going to be very useful," he said, "and you can't be useful if you're dead." She stared at him. "Useful to who?" He didn't answer that. The SUV took an interchange she didn't recognize, and she watched the city lights recede in the window and thought about Carter Voss and Sienna and the wire transfer record and Aldous Keene, who had never shown up to that meeting, which meant he was either running or he was already gone. She thought about the 4 men in that parking lot and the efficiency with which Roman DeLuca's people had handled them. She thought about the word useful and what it implied about what he knew and what he'd been watching. "You said you've been watching that meeting for 2 days, she said. "Correct." "Which means you knew I was going to be there." "Yes." "Which means you know more about the people I'm investigating than you've said." He was quiet for a moment. "Significantly more," he said. "Then I want to know what you know." He turned to look at her fully for the first time. The headlights of a passing vehicle moved across his face, and she saw something shift there. Not amusement exactly, more like recognition. "Ms. Mercer," he said, "you don't have any idea how deep this goes. So tell me." "I will," he said, "but first you need to understand something." He looked back at the road. "The people you were investigating tonight, they weren't the ones who sent those men to that parking lot. They were sent by the people above the people you were investigating, which means your story isn't about a shipping operation anymore." She felt the cold precision settle in her chest again. "What is it about?" The vehicle slowed. They were pulling into an underground parking structure, private, gated, cameras at every corner. "It's about the largest active human trafficking network operating on American soil," Roman said, and his voice didn't change cadence at all when he said it, the same flat precision as everything else. "And every major criminal organization on the East Coast thinks you have evidence that can destroy all of them." The gate opened. The vehicle moved forward. "I don't have that evidence," Rowan said. "They don't know that," Roman said, "which is a problem because they're not going to stop sending people until they're sure." The vehicle stopped. The doors unlocked. "I have a solution," Roman DeLuca said. "You're not going to like it." The parking structure was 4 levels underground, and it smelled like concrete and machine oil, and the kind of money that doesn't need to announce itself. Rowan stepped out of the SUV and the cold hit her. The specific cold of enclosed underground spaces, still and pressurized, the kind that gets into your sinuses. She counted the exits on instinct. 2 vehicle ramps, 1 stairwell door marked with a fire exit placard, 1 elevator bank, doors closed, 4 cameras she could see. Probably more she couldn't. Roman DeLuca was already moving toward the elevator, his men spread out around the vehicle in a pattern that looked casual and wasn't. "Where are we?" she said. "Somewhere safe." "That's not an answer." He pressed the elevator call button without looking at her. "No, it's not." The elevator opened. He stepped in. After 3 seconds of her standing where she was, he looked back, and the look wasn't impatient or threatening. It was the look of a man who had already made his calculation and was waiting for her to make hers. She stepped in. 2 of his men followed. The doors closed. The elevator rose. He brought her to a floor she couldn't identify from the outside. No windows, no signage, a long hallway with doors at regular intervals, and track lighting that was too warm for an office building and too cold for a residence. He led her into a room at the end of the hall. It was large, a conference table, a wall of monitors, half of them active, displaying camera feeds from angles she didn't recognize. A sideboard with a coffee setup that had been used recently. The carafe was still warm when she touched it, which she did immediately and without apology. "Sit," he said. "I'll stand." He sat, which she hadn't expected. He pulled a chair out and sat with the ease of a man who was not concerned about whether she sat or stood, which was more unsettling than if he'd insisted. "You said they think I have evidence," she said. "What evidence specifically?" "2 things." He laced his hands on the table. "A financial routing map that shows the full architecture of the trafficking network. Every shell company, every cutout, the political financing chain, the Port Authority connections. Extremely detailed. More detailed than anything law enforcement currently has." He paused. "And a secondary file. Names. Specific names of individuals in federal and state government who have received direct payments from the operation in exchange for protection." "I don't have either of those." "I know." "Then who does?" He was quiet for a moment. The monitors behind him showed a loading dock, a parking lot exterior, a hallway that looked like a hotel. "That's a more complicated question," he said. She pulled out a chair and sat. Because standing was becoming a performance she didn't have the energy to maintain. She poured coffee into a mug from the sideboard and wrapped both hands around it and looked at him directly. "You said every major criminal organization on the East Coast thinks I have this evidence. Why?" "Because 6 weeks ago," Roman said, "someone leaked your name to 3 separate organization leadership contacts. The Veltri family out of Philadelphia, the Shen Collective operating through New York's freight sector, and the Marchetti Caruso Syndicate in Baltimore, with a claim that you had been given the routing map and the names list by a federal source you were protecting." "That's not true." "No." "So someone wanted those organizations to come after me?" "Yes." She set the mug down. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. "Why would someone want that?" He looked at her with that same unreadable expression. Not cold, not warm, something that had moved past both into something functional. Because if you're dead, he said, and the three organizations believe they're responsible for silencing a journalist who had evidence against them, the evidence itself becomes proof of their guilt. Someone wants the organizations exposed. They used you as the mechanism. Someone set me up to be killed so that my death would build a case against criminal organizations. Essentially, do you know who? He didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer of a kind. Mr. DeLuca. She kept her voice flat. If you know who set this in motion and you're not telling me, then this conversation is going to go in a direction neither of us wants. Something moved in his expression, not quite amusement, closer to respect, though she might have been projecting. There are things I know, he said carefully, that I can't tell you tonight without putting you in more danger than you're already in. Not because I'm protecting myself, because the information has weight, and right now you're not in a position to carry it safely. That's a very elegant way of saying you don't trust me. I don't trust anyone, he said. That's not personal. She looked at the monitors. The loading dock feed had a timestamp running in the lower right corner. Current time. They were live feeds. You said you have a solution, she said, and that I wouldn't like it. You won't. Tell me anyway. He told her. She didn't speak for 30 seconds after he finished. She stared at the middle distance somewhere between his face and the wall of monitors and turned the proposition over in her mind with the same methodical rotation she applied to story structure, looking for the angles, the implications, the places where the logic held, and the places where it cracked. A legal marriage, his name, his protection. The untouchability of the DeLuca family extended over her like a canopy while the organizations hunting her recalibrated and the situation developed. No, she said. I understand. I'm a journalist. I cannot be legally affiliated with an organized crime family. That destroys every source relationship I have. It compromises every story I've published. It makes me a target for a completely different set of people, including federal investigators who would... The marriage would be confidential, he said, filed through a legal mechanism that keeps it sealed. No public record. Those mechanisms don't hold when federal subpoenas are involved. I have attorneys who have managed exactly that scenario successfully. And what do you get out of it? She said. It came out flat and direct, the way she asked questions when she already half knew the answer and wanted to see if the other person would give it honestly. He held her gaze. I get the appearance of a reason to involve myself in this situation that my own people will accept. I have men inside my organization who are loyal to someone other than me. If I deploy resources to protect a journalist without a personal stake, it reads as exposure, a liability. It creates problems internally. He paused. A wife is a personal stake. Even men who would otherwise challenge my decisions won't touch the question of a man protecting his wife. So I'm cover, she said. You're protected, he said. The distinction matters. Not to my career, it doesn't. He was quiet. She watched him not argue the point and respected that too, the way she respected anyone who didn't oversell. There were people who, when they hit the edge of their position's defensibility, kept pushing anyway. He didn't. I need 48 hours, she said. You have 12. That's not 12 hours, he said, because the Veltri organization had 2 men in that parking lot tonight, and when those men don't report back, Veltri's people are going to move to a secondary protocol. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I know it will involve finding you before morning. She looked at him. He wasn't bluffing. She'd spent enough years watching people bluff to know what it looked like in the body, in the face, in the particular rhythm of someone overselling certainty. He wasn't doing any of it. He was telling her the truth with the flat affect of someone who had been telling hard truths for long enough that the delivery had smoothed out. I need to make calls, she said. I'll have someone show you to a room. I want to make them privately. The room has no monitoring equipment. I want your word on that. He looked at her for a beat. You have it, he said, for whatever that's worth to you. I'll figure out what it's worth, she said. The room they gave her was on a higher floor and had a window that looked onto nothing. A light well between buildings, no view of the street. She called Marcus first. He picked up before the second ring. You're alive, he said. The relief in his voice had a ragged edge that she hadn't expected and that landed somewhere behind her breastbone. I'm alive. Listen. She told him the short version. The warehouse. The men. Roman DeLuca. She did not tell him the proposition. Not yet. Marcus was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then, DeLuca. Yes. Rowan, I know. He's not... I know, Marcus. Whatever he's offering, there's a leverage point in it for him. I know that too. So what are you going to do? She looked at the light well through the window. There was a single light fixture on the opposite wall, casting a yellow square on the concrete. I don't know yet, she said. I'll call you in the morning. She didn't sleep. She lay on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling and ran every angle she could find. And by the time gray light started differentiating itself from the darkness outside the light well, she had arrived at the only conclusion the evidence supported. She was out of options. Not because Roman DeLuca was trustworthy, she had no data on that yet, but because the alternative was to leave this building and go somewhere and wait for Veltri's people to find her, which they would, because she had nowhere to run that they wouldn't think to look. Her motel, her storage unit, Marcus's office, her mother's house, every location she had access to was a location someone could find. She went back downstairs at 6:15 in the morning. Roman was at the conference table with coffee and 3 other men she hadn't seen the previous night. The men looked at her when she came in. Roman dismissed them with a motion she almost missed, barely a shift of his fingers, and they left without comment. I have conditions, she said. I expected you would. She sat. She put her conditions on the table one at a time the way she'd always laid out sourcing requirements to reluctant contacts, clean, direct, without apology. Her reporting continued, unobstructed. He had no access to her notes, her sources, her drafts. The arrangement ended the moment she determined it was no longer necessary for her safety. A formal document drafted by her own attorney, not his, outlining the parameters. And he told her now, this morning, what he knew about who had orchestrated the leak that put her name in front of the criminal organizations. He listened to all of it without interrupting. The reporting conditions I accept, he said. The document I accept. The attorney is yours, not mine. He paused. The information about who leaked your name. I'll tell you part of it, the part that's safe to tell. Which part is that? The person who leaked your name is someone you know, he said. Someone you trusted. And it wasn't done to destroy you. It was done to accelerate a timeline that person believed was moving too slowly. She sat with that. The phrasing was too specific to be vague. Accelerate a timeline, moving too slowly. That was someone running an operation, not a grudge. Someone who had a goal and decided her death was an acceptable instrument in its service. Carter Voss, she said. No, Roman said. She hadn't been certain. She'd set it to read his reaction, and the reaction was a clean negative without hesitation, which told her he wasn't protecting Carter, which meant Carter wasn't the answer. Then who? That's the part I can't tell you safely. Not yet. She studied him. He met the study without shifting. You're going to keep using that phrase, she said. Not yet. At some point, not yet has to become something concrete, or this arrangement doesn't work. Agreed, he said. They were married 3 days later. The ceremony took 4 minutes in a county clerk's office in a jurisdiction she wasn't familiar with, presided over by an official she never got the full name of. Roman had given her his arm with the same flat efficiency he applied to everything else, and she had taken it with the same. The certificate was filed. The sealing mechanism Roman's attorneys had prepared went through the same day. She moved into the DeLuca residence, a fortified brownstone in a neighborhood that looked residential and wasn't, the kind of block where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed within 30 seconds. That evening. She was given a room on the 3rd floor. Her files and her laptop came with her. The household was 15 people minimum at any given time. Not all of them were obvious, but some dressed like domestic staff, some like the kind of vaguely purposeful people who exist in the background of wealthy households. All of them were armed. She cataloged that on the first day and stopped being startled by it by the 3rd. What she hadn't expected was the way the household actually functioned. There was no noise, no performative menace. The people in that brownstone went about their work with the compressed professionalism of a team that had operated together for a long time, that had filtered out everyone who couldn't hold themselves to that standard. It was, she thought, almost more disciplined than the newsroom she'd worked in. Roman himself was largely absent during the days. He appeared at dinner when he was in the building, sat at the head of the table with the same contained quality he'd had in the parking structure, ate with the efficiency of someone who used meals as fuel rather than ritual, and asked her, on the second night, what she was working on. "The routing map," she said, trying to reconstruct it from what I have. He nodded, as if this were expected. "I could give you pieces," he said. "Components of the network architecture I've had confirmed through other means, without sourcing attribution." She looked at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because the network needs to be destroyed," he said, "and your story is a mechanism for that." "That's not an answer. That's a goal. I want to know why the goal matters to you specifically." He was quiet for a moment. The other people at the table had the quality of furniture, present, not listening. "The organization that built this network," he said, "used the DeLuca family's freight infrastructure to do it. They used our port access, our shipping relationships, our political connections. They did it without my consent and without my knowledge, because at the time they built it, I wasn't the one making those decisions." She waited. "My father ran this family until 12 years ago," he said. "The men who built this network inside our infrastructure were men my father trusted, men who had their own agenda and used his trust as a tool." He looked at his plate. "My father died before he found out what they'd built inside what he'd left them." She logged that. Not just the content, the way he said it, the grammar of someone who had practiced not showing what something cost him. "You want it dismantled because it's built on your family's infrastructure, and that makes it your responsibility," she said. "And because of what it does to people," he said, in a voice that had changed register slightly, flattened further. The way voices flatten when they're covering something that isn't flat at all. What it does to the people inside those containers. She didn't say anything. That was reporting instinct, knowing when to let silence work. He didn't feel it. 4 days into the arrangement, she met Marco Reyes. Marco was Roman's second, the operational head of the DeLuca organization's day-to-day functions, which meant he ran logistics, personnel, enforcement, and everything that didn't require Roman's direct authority. He was compact, dark-eyed, with a kind of face that had been weathered into something neutral. He was civil to her. He was civil the way marble is civil, smooth, permanent, and fundamentally unwilling to yield. "You're doing security briefings?" she said to Roman after the first time she'd seen Marco's face shift in a particular way when he looked at her. "Yes. Reyes doesn't like me being here." "Reyes doesn't like variables," Roman said. "I'm a variable." "You're also my wife," he said, which means his opinion of variables is not operationally relevant. She didn't ask what operationally relevant meant in this context. She had a reasonable hypothesis. A week in, she caught Marco on a phone call he ended the moment he registered her presence in the hallway outside the study. The ending of the call wasn't suspicious in itself. The person he'd been speaking to, whose voice had carried one half of a sentence through the door before Marco cut the call, that was what mattered. Because the voice had said 2 words she recognized, and those 2 words were the name of the Nevada shell company she'd traced 3 weeks ago in her motel room. She was very still in the hallway. Marco looked at her. "Ms. Mercer," he said. "Rowan," she said, because she'd asked him to use her name 4 times and he consistently didn't, and she wanted to see what he did with it now. He nodded once and walked past her. She went upstairs. She opened her laptop. She pulled up her notes on the Nevada Shell Company and cross-referenced everything she had on its ownership structure. Then she opened a new document and wrote one line at the top. "Someone in this house is connected to the network." She sat with that. Then she heard the front door. She heard Roman's voice in the entry hall, and another voice she didn't immediately recognize, and then a voice she did. She was down the stairs before she'd consciously decided to move. Carter Voss was standing in the entry hall. He was in a suit, slightly disheveled, his composure showing hairline fractures at the edges, mouth too tight, eyes moving too fast. He was looking at Roman with the expression of a man who was either trying to negotiate or already failing at it. He saw Rowan and went very still. "What is he doing here?" she said. It wasn't a question. Roman looked between them. For the first time since she'd met him, she caught something uncertain in his expression. Not confusion, but the specific look of someone who has just understood that two pieces of information they've been keeping separate are about to collide. Carter Voss came to me 2 days before we met, Roman said, carefully. He said he had information about the trafficking network. He said he could give me names of people inside the operation in exchange for protection. The air in the entry hall was very still. He's been a source, Rowan said. He's been a source, Roman confirmed. She looked at Carter. He was looking at her with something in his face that might have been shame or might have been calculation. She couldn't separate them anymore. She realized she'd never been able to. She realized she'd mistaken one for the other for 3 years. The wedding, she said, leaving me at the altar, Sienna. She kept her voice level through an act of will that cost her something she didn't have a name for. Was any of that about me at all, or was it all operational cover? Carter opened his mouth. Don't, she said. Don't answer me right now. I need you to understand that whatever you say in the next 30 seconds is going to determine whether I walk out of this building and finish building a story that puts you in federal prison, or whether you have an opportunity to be something other than the worst version of yourself. She paused. So think before you talk. He closed his mouth. Roman had gone very still. He was watching her, and the quality of his attention had shifted. Sharper, she thought, than she'd seen it before. Not calculating. More like someone watching something they hadn't anticipated. The wire transfer, Carter said finally. His voice was hollow. The one you found before the wedding. Someone sent it to you. Anonymous text, she said. Yes. I sent it, he said. The silence that followed had a specific texture. You sent me the wire transfer that connected you to the shell company in my story, she said. I sent you the wire transfer, he said, because I needed you to pull that thread. Because I've been trying to find a way to get that network exposed for 2 years, and I couldn't do it without the whole thing crashing down on me. And I thought if you started pulling it, if you got close enough, someone who could actually... He stopped. His throat worked. I didn't know they'd send people to kill you. I didn't know it would move that fast. You didn't know, she said. Rowan, you used me, she said. You used our relationship. You humiliated me in front of 200 people. You sent me an anonymous tip that pointed me at a story that nearly got me killed, and you didn't know it would move that fast. She breathed, controlled, 4 counts. And Sienna. What is Sienna? Carter looked at Roman. Roman looked at Carter. Something passed between them that Rowan couldn't read, and the fact that she couldn't read it was the most frightening thing that had happened in a building where everything tonight had been frightening. What is Sienna? She said again, harder. I can't tell you that, Carter said. You don't get to say that to me right now. Rowan. Roman's voice. Quiet. She turned to look at him, and he was looking at her with something that was close to the first genuinely human expression she'd seen on his face. Not warmth exactly, but something that recognized what this moment was costing her. There are things about your sister that need to come from her, not from him, not from me. Is she in danger? A pause. No. Is she part of this, the network, the operation, whatever this is? Yes, Roman said. But not the way you think. She stood in the entry hall of a brownstone she'd lived in for 8 days, legally married to a man she'd known for 11, looking at the face of the man she'd spent 3 years building a life with, and she understood with the clean, cold clarity that good journalists develop and never entirely want, that she had been the last person in her own story to understand what the story was actually about. I want to talk to Sienna, she said. That's not possible right now, Roman said. Make it possible. She's not reachable, he said. Her location is... He stopped. Something moved behind his eyes. Something that looked for just a second like the specific fear of a man who has just understood that a variable he thought he controlled has moved outside his control. He crossed to the monitor panel on the study wall and pulled up a feed she hadn't seen before. A location she didn't recognize. A parking structure, different from the one she'd arrived in. Exterior camera angle. The feed showed 3 black vehicles. All three were stationary. All three had their doors open. They were empty. "Reyes," Roman said, and his voice had changed into something she hadn't heard from him yet. Stripped down, no management in it, just the raw operational core. "Where is Reyes?" Nobody answered. Rowan looked at the monitor. She looked at the empty vehicles. She thought about the phone call in the hallway, the 2 words through the door, the name of a Nevada shell company that had no reason to exist in a conversation inside this building. She looked at Roman. "You're second," she said. "Reyes. He's the one who leaked my name." Roman was already moving toward the door, and the look on his face as he passed her confirmed it before he said a single word. The mole had been inside the house the entire time. Roman moved fast for a man who never appeared to be moving fast. That was the thing Rowan had noticed in the first week, the way he covered ground without seeming to accelerate, the way distance closed between him and wherever he was going without the visible effort that most people couldn't hide. She noticed it again now, crossing the entry hall toward the monitor panel, pulling out a phone that was already unlocked, already dialing before it cleared his pocket. She followed him into the study. "Lock the building," he said into the phone. "All exterior access. I want a head count on every person inside this structure in the next 4 minutes." He paused. "Because Reyes is gone and I want to know who went with him." He ended the call. He looked at the monitor feed. The 3 empty vehicles were still there, doors open, abandoned with the specific carelessness of people who left in a hurry and didn't care what they left behind them. "How long has he been your second?" Rowan said. 7 years. "And you didn't know?" It wasn't an accusation. She delivered it the way she delivered questions to sources she wanted to keep talking. Flat, observational, giving them room to answer without the defensive reflex that accusation produced. He heard the distinction. She could tell by the way his jaw worked. "I didn't know," he said. "The Nevada Shell Company." He knew the name. "I heard you the first time." "I'm not repeating myself for your benefit," she said. "I'm thinking out loud. The Nevada company is 3 nodes deep in the network architecture. To know that name, Reyes would need to have access to operational financial records that go above the family's involvement, which means he's not just connected to the network. He's connected to whoever built it. Roman turned and looked at her fully. "The people who built it inside my family's infrastructure," he said slowly. "The men who used my father's trust." "If Reyes has been here 7 years," she said, "he was here when your father was still—" "Yes," Roman said. The word came out clipped, final. The way words come out when someone is processing something that changes the shape of a thing they thought they understood. Carter Voss was still in the entry hall. She'd half forgotten him. She went back to the doorway. "You need to tell me everything you know about Marco Reyes," she said. Carter looked like a man who hadn't slept in 4 days and had recently been forced to look at something he'd been avoiding. "I don't know the name." "The man who ran operations in this house. Dark eyes, compact build, face like a closed door." Carter shook his head slowly. "I've never been in this house before tonight." "Who sent you tonight?" "I got a message. Anonymous. Told me to come here. Told me to tell DeLuca what I know about the network's political financing chain. Said it was the right moment. That things were moving." "Anonymous," she said. "Yes." "Same channel as the text you sent me before the wedding?" He hesitated. "No. Different." She filed that. 2 separate anonymous contacts orchestrating separate movements in the same night. The warehouse ambush, Reyes disappearing, Carter arriving. The feed showing empty vehicles. All of it in the same 12-hour window. Someone was running a sequence. She went back to the study. Roman was at the monitor panel, pulling up feeds she hadn't known existed. More cameras, more angles, a map overlay she couldn't read from where she stood. One of his men had appeared, a heavy-set man named Decker, who was the only person in the household she'd heard Roman address by name. Decker had a tablet and a look of controlled alarm. "Reyes pulled the Seaward consolidated files before he left," Decker said. "Digital pull 40 minutes ago. Everything we had on the network's freight routing." Roman didn't react visibly. That was how she knew it was bad. The stillness was too complete. "What else?" "He accessed the communications archive. The last 14 months." 14 months of Roman's communications with whatever contacts he maintained. 14 months of a record that, in the wrong hands, would tell the network's leadership exactly how much Roman knew, who he'd been talking to, and what he'd been building toward. "He's going to sell it," Rowan said. "Or deliver it," Roman said. "There's a difference." Who would he deliver it to? Roman was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, the Marchetti Caruso leadership. Baltimore. Reyes came up through a Marchetti Caruso affiliate before he came to me. I knew that. I verified his separation from them. I was thorough. Something shifted in the line of his mouth. Not thorough enough. Decker's tablet chimed. He looked at it, and whatever he saw made his face do something it hadn't done before. A flicker of something raw. "What?" Roman said. Decker turned the tablet. On the screen was a photograph, cell phone quality, taken from distance, slightly motion blurred. It showed a woman being moved between two vehicles in what looked like an underground parking structure. Dark hair. The angle was bad. But the jaw, the posture, the specific way the figure held her shoulders. Rowan knew that jaw. She knew those shoulders. She took the tablet from Decker's hands before Roman could stop her. She looked at the photograph for 4 seconds. "That's Sienna," she said. The room was very quiet. "When was this taken?" she said. "Timestamp says 43 minutes ago," Decker said. 43 minutes ago. While Rowan had been in the entry hall listening to Carter Voss explain how he'd used her engagement as an instrument. While Roman had been locking down the building, while Reyes had been already gone. "Where?" Roman said. "We don't know yet. Photo came through a secure channel. Anonymous sender." "Same anonymous sender who messaged Carter," Rowan said, and it wasn't a question. Roman looked at her. She looked at him. The same calculation moved through both of them at the same time, and she could see it in his eyes. The recognition that the sequence they were inside was not chaos. It was choreography. Someone had moved Reyes. Someone had brought Carter here. Someone had sent that photograph. All of it timed, all of it deliberate. "Someone is controlling the sequence," she said. "Yes." "Someone who knew Reyes was compromised before we did." "Yes." "Someone who has access to your secure channels and to Carter's contact information and to wherever Sienna was." She set the tablet down. Her hands were still steady. The steadiness was costing her more than it had before. "Roman, I need you to tell me what you know about my sister. All of it. Right now. Not the safe version. All of it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Decker. "Give us the room." Decker left. The door closed. Roman sat on the edge of the conference table, and the posture was the first thing she'd seen from him that was genuinely tired. Not performed fatigue, actual weight. "Your sister has been working undercover for 3 years," he said. "FBI. She's embedded in the network's political financing operation through her cover relationship with Voss." Rowan didn't move. "The engagement wasn't betrayal," he said. "It was an operational cover. She needed access to Voss's financial network, and a personal relationship was the fastest route in. The wedding, leaving you at the altar, that was Carter's deviation. That wasn't sanctioned by her handlers. He panicked about something and moved the timeline, and she had to adapt in real time or blow her cover." Rowan breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. "She was working," she said. "Yes." "For 3 years she was working." "Yes." "And she couldn't tell me." Roman said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that. She walked to the window. The light well outside was fully dark now, the yellow square of the opposite light fixture the only thing visible. She looked at it and let the information restructure itself inside her. 3 years of what she'd believed was her sister's absence, her sister's distance, the way Sienna had gradually become unreachable, not returning calls with her usual speed, not showing up at the edges of Rowan's life the way she always had. She'd attributed it to Sienna's work, to the vague government consulting Sienna had described in terms that never quite resolved into specifics. She'd attributed it to the natural drift of two people building different lives. She'd attributed it to everything except the truth, which was that her twin sister had been embedded in a criminal network and had been protecting Rowan from knowing it. "Her handlers," Rowan said. "Who runs her operation?" "That I genuinely don't know," Roman said. She operates through a contact I've never been able to identify. The operation is compartmented tightly enough that even my sources inside federal law enforcement don't have the full picture. Rowan turned from the window. You have sources inside federal law enforcement? Yes. How long? He met her eyes. 6 years, he said. I've been feeding intelligence to a federal contact for 6 years. The network's infrastructure, movement patterns, personnel, financing chains, everything I've been able to build from inside. She stared at him. You're an informant. I'm a confidential source, he said, with the particular precision of someone making a distinction that matters to them personally. The difference is meaningful. You've been dismantling the network from inside while running the family. Trying to, he said. It's slower than I want. More complicated. The network is embedded in the family's infrastructure deep enough that separating them without triggering a response requires... He stopped. It requires time I may not have anymore if Reyes delivers those files. Because the files show how much you know. Because the files show how much I know, who I've been talking to, and the fact that the intelligence I've been feeding federal contacts is accurate enough to have produced 3 sealed indictments in the last 2 years that haven't been executed yet. He paused. If the network's leadership sees those files, the indictments become worthless. Every named individual disappears or lawyers up before the warrants can be served. She processed the full geometry of it. Roman feeding federal intelligence from inside. Sienna embedded in the political financing arm. Carter, who was something she still didn't have a clean category for. A man who was either a coward trying to undo damage he'd helped cause or something more complicated, all of them working angles on the same network from different positions. And Reyes, who had been inside Roman's household for 7 years, had just taken everything. The photograph of Sienna, she said. Someone sent it to us. Someone who knew she'd been taken, which means someone else is watching this situation from outside. Yes. Someone with access to your secure channels. Yes. Your federal contact, she said. Roman's expression changed. Not much. Enough. That's possible, he said quietly. Is your federal contact trying to accelerate the timeline? Push everything to a conclusion before Reyes can deliver those files? If they are, Roman said, they're doing it without telling me, which is a breach of the arrangement we... His phone went off. He looked at it. Whatever was on the screen made him go very still in the specific way she'd learned to read as significant. He turned the phone so she could see it. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. 14 words. Reyes is going to Marchetti Caruso tonight. Sienna is with him. You have 4 hours. Below the text was a single photograph, different from the parking structure image. This one was sharper, taken from closer, clearly deliberate. It showed a room she didn't recognize. Industrial, high ceilings, exposed pipework. A table, documents spread across it. And standing at the table, looking at the documents with the focused concentration of someone doing something they'd done before, was a face she knew. Not Sienna, not Reyes, not anyone from the network she'd been building toward for 3 weeks. It was the woman who had been Sienna's handler, the federal contact, the person running the undercover operation from the government side. Rowan knew her because she'd interviewed her twice for unrelated stories over the past 4 years. She was a senior official in a federal oversight division. She'd been a source, a trusted one. Her name was Deputy Director Carolyn Marsh, and in the photograph spread across the table in front of Carolyn Marsh were documents Rowan recognized. The routing map, the names list, the complete evidence architecture that every criminal organization on the East Coast believed Rowan possessed. She has the evidence, Rowan said. Roman was very still. Marsh has had it the entire time, Rowan said. She's the one who leaked my name to the organizations. She used me as a decoy to draw the network's attention while she built the actual case from the other direction. She heard her own voice saying it and heard the flatness in it that came from processing something too large for immediate feeling. She let them come after me. She let me nearly get killed in that warehouse, because a dead journalist with the evidence was more useful to her case than a living one. She underestimated how fast they'd move, Roman said. Or she calculated it correctly and the warehouse was supposed to be the end point, Rowan said. My death confirmed by the organization's proof of their operational reach, enough for warrants. The silence in the room was absolute. And now Sienna is with Reyes, she said, being moved to Marchetti Caruso leadership, and Marsh sent us a photograph of it with a 4-hour window. She looked at Roman. She's not warning us, she's deploying us. She wants us to go get Sienna, because if we do, we'll collide with Reyes. And when that collision happens, it exposes Marchetti Caruso's operational location, and she gets everything she needs for the warrants without risking any of her own people. Roman set the phone down carefully. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at her. She's going to burn all of us, he said. Me, Sienna, Carter, you. Whatever use we've been to her timeline, the moment those warrants execute, we're all loose ends. Federal prosecutors don't like loose ends, Rowan said. No. So we don't go, she said. If we don't go, Roman said, Sienna is with Marchetti Caruso in 4 hours with no extraction and no cover. And Reyes delivers those files and every sealed indictment is worthless. She looked at him. He looked at her. We go, she said. But not the way Marsh wants us to. What does that mean? She reached across the table and picked up his phone. She looked at the photograph of Carolyn Marsh. She looked at the documents spread across the table in front of her. The routing map, the names list, the evidence that had been used to orchestrate everything that had happened to Rowan in the last 3 weeks, including the thing Rowan was about to do. It means I need that evidence, she said, not for Marsh's case, for mine. She set the phone down. If I publish the routing map and the names list before those warrants execute, Marsh loses control of the timeline. The corrupt officials can't be quietly managed through sealed federal proceedings. They're public. Every name is public. And Marsh can't bury us as loose ends without burying herself, because I'll have sourced the story in a way that points directly back to her operation if anything happens to any of us. Roman looked at her for a long moment. You're going to use your own story as a shield. I'm going to publish the truth, she said, which is what I was trying to do before any of this started. She picked up her own phone. I need to get into that room where Marsh is working. I need to photograph those documents. And I need to get Sienna out of wherever Reyes is taking her before the 4-hour window closes. That's 3 simultaneous objectives, Roman said. Yes. With 4 hours. Less now. He was quiet. She could see him running the operational geometry. Personnel, vehicles, timing, risk distribution across 3 locations he didn't have confirmed addresses for yet. The room in the photograph, he said. I think I know the building. How? Because I own it, he said. Or I did. I sold it 8 months ago through a holding company to a buyer whose identity I never confirmed. He picked up his phone and pulled up a map overlay on the monitor panel. If Marsh is using it, she either bought it from the buyer I sold to, or the buyer was always working for her. Which means she's been building toward this for at least 8 months, Rowan said. At least, he said. She looked at the map. She looked at the 4-hour window. She looked at the man she'd married 11 days ago in a 4-minute ceremony in a county clerk's office, and she understood, with the cold, functional clarity she'd always relied on and had never needed more than right now, that the only way out of Carolyn Marsh's carefully constructed sequence was to move faster than Marsh had calculated either of them could move. Get your people, she said. Roman was already reaching for his phone when the study door opened. Carter Voss stood in the doorway. His face had changed. The hollow look was gone, replaced by something harder and more decided, the expression of a man who has been standing outside a closed door listening and has resolved what he's going to do about what he heard. I know where they're taking Sienna, he said. Roman and Rowan both looked at him. Marchetti Caruso has a secondary facility, Carter said, not their main operation. A fallback location they use when they're moving sensitive assets, and they don't want anyone who knows their primary facility to be able to track them. He paused. I've been there. Once. 8 months ago, when they were still deciding whether to bring me further into the financing chain. He looked at Rowan with the specific expression of a man who is not asking forgiveness and knows it. I can get you in. The room was very quiet. Why? Roman said. Because Sienna knew what she was doing when she took this assignment, Carter said. And I knew what I was doing when I got involved with these people. And someone needs to start paying for what they built instead of running from it. Rowan looked at him for 3 seconds. She looked at the specific quality of his face, not performed remorse, not the managed contrition of a man trying to negotiate his way to a better outcome. Something rawer than that. The face of someone who had been carrying the weight of a bad decision for long enough that the weight had finally become unbearable. She didn't forgive him. She filed the moment and moved past it because there wasn't time for anything else. How far is the facility? She said. 40 minutes south, industrial waterfront, old cannery building, private dock access on the back side. Roman was already at the monitor panel, pulling the map overlay south toward the waterfront corridor below the city. His finger found a cluster of decommissioned industrial buildings along a stretch of private dock access and stopped. Here, he said. Carter looked at the map. Yes. Roman pulled out his phone and made 2 calls in under 90 seconds. Short, clipped, the compressed language of people who had rehearsed for exactly this kind of movement. When he put the phone down, he looked at Rowan. We have 20 minutes to get mobile, he said. My people will handle the marsh location, photograph everything in that room and get out clean. I need to be with the extraction. I'm coming with you, Rowan said. No. Sienna is my sister. Which is exactly why... Roman. She said his name the way she said the names of sources who were about to make a mistake, direct, without anger, cutting through the argument before it could fully form. I am not staying here. You don't have the personnel to spare to keep me contained and run 2 simultaneous operations. And I can identify Sienna under conditions your people can't, in the dark, from distance, under stress. You need me. He looked at her. The calculation moved across his face openly for once, not hidden behind the managed exterior. Stay behind the perimeter line until we have Sienna clear, he said. Agreed. If I tell you to move, you move. No journalist instinct, no additional objectives. Agreed. He held her gaze for 1 more second, then nodded. He moved toward the door. Carter started to follow, and Roman stopped without turning around. Not you, Roman said. I told you how to find her, Carter said. Yes, Roman said. And when this is over, you're going to tell a federal prosecutor everything you just told us, on record, with your name attached. He paused. That's how you pay for what you built. Not with a gun in a dark building, with your name on a piece of paper in a courtroom. He looked back at Carter once. Stay here. Don't touch anything. Carter stood in the study doorway with his hands at his sides and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Rowan followed Roman into the hallway, and the building was already moving around them, doors opening, people repositioning, vehicles being pulled from the lower level. The whole machine of it activating with the quiet, terrible efficiency of something that had been built for exactly this. She kept pace beside him and did not let herself think about Sienna in a dark building 40 minutes south, or Carolyn Marsh arranging evidence in a room she'd bought with money she'd hidden, or the 4-hour window that was already bleeding down to 3. She thought about the story. She thought about the names on that list. She thought about what it would mean to publish them. Every corrupt official, every protected financier, every political donor who had looked the other way while people were moved in containers marked agricultural equipment. She thought about what it would cost her to finish it. She decided the cost didn't matter. The vehicle doors closed. The building fell away behind them. The city opened up dark and cold ahead, and somewhere inside it, everything that had been set in motion weeks ago was moving toward the only kind of ending that stories like this ever actually had. Not clean, not triumphant, but true. The cannery building had been dead for 20 years, and it smelled like it. Salt and rust, and the particular rot of wood that has been wet and dried and wet again so many times the grain has given up holding itself together. The private dock access on the south side of the building was still functional. Rowan could see the lights of 2 vessels moored at the dock through the gap in the cannery's exterior wall where a loading panel had been removed at some point and never replaced. The gap was roughly 4 feet wide, and it let in the river wind and the smell of diesel and the distant sound of water moving against pilings. They'd come in from the north. 4 vehicles, lights off for the last half mile, parked in the shadow of a decommissioned freight depot 2 blocks up the road. Roman had 11 people with him. Rowan had stayed behind the forward position the way she'd agreed, crouched behind the low concrete barrier of what had once been a vehicle turnaround, watching the building's north face. The building had 4 visible entry points, 2 roll-up loading doors on the north face, both closed and padlocked from outside, which meant they weren't being used as active exits. 1 personnel door on the east face, slightly ajar, a thin line of light visible at the edge. 1 roof access ladder on the west face, the kind bolted to the exterior wall, extending to a hatch she couldn't see from her position. Roman's people had covered the east door and the west ladder. 2 people were on the roof of the freight depot with sightlines to the dock. The remaining personnel were stacked on the north face, waiting. Roman was beside her. He'd been on the phone for the drive down and had stopped talking 2 minutes out, which meant whatever intelligence he'd been pulling was now complete and filed. He looked at the building the way she'd seen him look at other things. The comprehensive scan, nothing decorative about it, every piece of information collected and weighted. "Reyes is inside," he said quietly. "We have confirmation he arrived 40 minutes ago. 2 Marchetti Caruso vehicles already on site, which means their reception team was already here when he arrived. How many people total? Unknown. Minimum 8 based on vehicle capacity. Could be 12, could be more if they had people staged inside already. Sienna, we don't have visual confirmation yet." He looked at her briefly. "We will." She nodded. She pressed her back against the concrete barrier and felt the cold of it through her jacket and focused on her breathing. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Her pulse was elevated. She could feel it in her throat. But it was steady, not spiking, which meant her body was managing the adrenaline rather than being managed by it. "The east door," she said. "That's the active entry." "Yes, which means anyone trying to leave in a hurry goes east." "Which is why I have 4 people on it," Roman said. "Reyes knows your people," she said. "He's worked with them for 7 years. He knows faces, he knows tactics, he knows how your teams move." Roman was quiet for a beat. "Yes. So when your people hit that east door, he'll know within seconds what the response team looks like, and he'll adapt to it." She looked at the building. "Someone he doesn't know needs to be the first through." Roman looked at her. The look was flat and immediate. "No." "I'm not arguing Mo. No, Rowan. He doesn't know my face in an operational context. To him, I'm a journalist who got pulled into this. He won't read me as a threat for the first 3 seconds, and in a close-quarters situation, 3 seconds is, "You're not a trained operative." "I know how to move through a building without being heard," she said. "I've done it in worse situations than this for stories." She held his gaze. "I'm not going in as muscle. I'm going in as distraction. I go through the east door first. Reyes sees a face he doesn't categorize as immediate threat. He takes a half-second to recalibrate, and your people come through behind me." The muscle in his jaw moved. She could see him running the calculation, hating the calculation, arriving at the same answer she had. "You stay low," he said. "The moment my people are through, you get to the wall and you stay there." "Yes." "If I tell you down, you go down. No hesitation." "Yes." He held her eyes for 1 more second. Then he keyed his radio and said 3 words, "East door, 30 seconds," and looked back at the building. She moved. The east door was 20 yards across open ground from the concrete barrier. She covered it in a low, fast line, staying below the sight line of the gap in the north loading panel, reaching the door and pressing flat against the exterior wall beside it. The light through the door's edge was yellowish, industrial, the kind of temporary work lighting you hung on hooks. She could hear voices inside. Not the words. The rhythm. 3 distinct voices. 2 close together, 1 further back, the further back one with a cadence that suggested someone in authority. She looked back. Roman's people were moving up behind her, 4 of them, stacked against the wall in the compressed shoulder posture of people who had done this before. Roman was 3rd in the stack. He caught her eye and gave her a single nod. She pushed the door open and went in. The interior of the cannery was vast and mostly dark except for the work lighting strung along the central beam line, illuminating a rough rectangle of space in the middle of the building. The smell hit her first, the rot of the building, and under it something chemical, cleaning solvent or industrial lubricant. She registered the space in a fast scan. High ceiling, exposed beams, rusted equipment housings pushed to the walls, a row of steel support columns running the length of the building, the dock access visible through the building's south end, the moored vessel's lights coming through. 3 people in the lit rectangle, one on a phone, facing away. One at a folding table with documents. The seaward consolidated files, she recognized the format immediately, and one facing the east door who saw her in the first second. Marco Reyes. He was 12 feet away. He looked at her with the specific expression of a man whose mind is doing rapid threat assessment. She could see it in the micro-movement of his eyes, the way they moved across her face and her hands, and the door behind her in the same instant. She gave him the half-second she'd promised. Then Roman's people came through the door. What happened next was fast and loud and nothing like the movies. The man on the phone dropped it and moved toward the south end. The man at the table knocked it over, going sideways, documents scattering across the concrete floor. Reyes didn't run. He did the opposite. He moved toward her, which she hadn't anticipated, closing the distance between them in 2 steps, and his hand came up and she had enough time to register the object in it before Roman's voice came from behind her, very loud, very flat. Marco. Reyes stopped. He was 4 feet from her. She could see the sweat on his forehead, the particular shine of it in the work lighting. His eyes moved from her to Roman, and in the movement she saw something she hadn't expected. Not fear, not defiance. Grief. The specific hollowed-out grief of someone who has done something they cannot undo. "Put it down," Roman said. Reyes's hand lowered, slowly. "On the floor," Roman said. The object hit the concrete. "Where's Sienna Mercer?" Roman said. Reyes said nothing. Roman moved forward and Rowan stepped aside. He stopped 2 feet from Reyes and looked at him with the expression she'd learned to read as the most dangerous one in his repertoire. Not anger, not menace, just the total absence of the management he usually maintained. What was underneath the management was very old and very cold. 7 years, Roman said. Reyes met his eyes. "I know. Tell me where she is." "Lower level," Reyes said. "Dock access stairwell. They were holding her there until the exchange completed." "How many on her?" "2. Marchetti Caruso's." Roman turned and said 2 names, Decker, Torres, and the 2 men at the back of the entry stack broke immediately toward the south end of the building. Rowan moved to follow, and Roman's hand came out without looking, not grabbing, just blocking. She stopped. She looked at the scattered documents on the floor. She crouched and started collecting them. "Don't," Reyes said. She looked up at him. "These are evidence." "They're also leverage," he said. "You take those, you don't know what you're carrying. What's in those files isn't just the network, it's—" "I know what's in them," she said. She kept collecting. "There are names in there that will get you killed before you can publish them." "There are names in there that need to be published," she said. "That's the difference between us." She looked at him directly. "You had access to this for 7 years. 7 years of knowing what this network was doing, what it was moving, what it was costing. You could have been the one to end it." She held his gaze. "Why didn't you?" His jaw worked. "It's not that simple." "It never is," she said. "People do it anyway." She had most of the documents gathered when she heard the gunshots, 2 of them. Suppressed, the flat thud sound of rounds fired through a suppressor coming from the south end of the building near the dock stairwell. Then a shout. Not words, just a shout. And then running footsteps on a metal staircase. Roman was already moving. Rowan shoved the documents into her jacket and followed. The dock access stairwell was a steel structure bolted to the building's south interior wall, descending to a lower level that had once been a processing floor and now opened directly onto the dock. The lights down there were off. Rowan hit the stairs third behind Roman and one of his men, and the descent was 12 steps into near-total darkness, broken only by the vessel lights coming in through the dock opening. She heard breathing, irregular, someone hurt. Decker's voice, from the darkness. "Clear, we're clear." Lights came on. Someone had a flashlight, then a second one, and the lower level resolved out of the dark. 2 men down near the dock opening, neither of them Decker or Torres. Between the support columns on the left side, Sienna Mercer was sitting on the concrete floor, with her back against the column and her hand zip-tied in front of her. and she was looking at the flashlight beams with the deliberate blinking of someone working to maintain consciousness. Rowan was down the last 4 steps before she knew she was moving. She hit her knees on the concrete in front of her sister, and Sienna's eyes found her face, and something happened in Sienna's expression that wasn't relief. It was more complicated than relief, more layered. 3 years of complicated compressed into a single look between 2 people who shared the same face and had spent that time on opposite sides of a wall neither of them had built. "Hey," Sienna said. Her voice was rough. "Hey," Rowan said. Someone was cutting the zip ties. Rowan didn't look to see who. She was looking at her sister's face, the cut above her left eyebrow, the way she was holding her right shoulder, the specific exhaustion in her eyes that wasn't just tonight. "You knew," Rowan said. Not accusing, establishing. "Not everything," Sienna said. "Not you and him." Her eyes moved briefly to Roman, who was standing behind Rowan. "That was not part of anything I was running." "But the rest of it?" Sienna looked at her. "Yes." The zip ties came free. Sienna moved her hands apart and winced, and Rowan caught the right one and held it. "Marsh," Rowan said. Sienna went very still. "Carolyn Marsh," Rowan said. "She's your handler." A beat. "Was," Sienna said. "What does that mean?" "It means the operation was supposed to have federal protection all the way through," Sienna said. "It means 3 weeks ago I found out that Marsh had been running a parallel timeline, one that didn't include extracting me safely before the warrants executed, one that used my embedded position as additional evidence of the network's reach without any plan to pull me out clean." Her voice was flat and precise in the way that voices get when they're describing something the speaker has been living with long enough to have drained the surface emotion off it. "I've been operating without handler contact for 18 days. "She burned you," Roman said from behind Rowan. "She was always going to burn me," Sienna said. "I just didn't know it until I found the secondary operation brief." She looked at Rowan. "The leak. Your name going to the organizations, that was Marsh. I was trying to reach you to warn you. I couldn't find a channel that wasn't compromised." "The anonymous text at the wedding," Rowan said. "The wire transfer." "That was me," Sienna said. "I sent it through Carter because it was the only channel I had. I needed you pulling the financial thread so you'd have enough of the story built that Marsh couldn't bury you by burying the evidence. If you had enough of it in your own reporting, independently sourced, she couldn't make you disappear without the story disappearing with you." She paused. "I didn't know how fast it would move. I didn't know about the warehouse." The dock creaked. One of the vessels outside shifted against its mooring line. Somewhere above them in the main building there were footsteps. Roman's people moving, securing, doing the things they did after an action went through. "Marsh has the full evidence package," Rowan said. "The routing map, the names list. She's had it the whole time." "I know," Sienna said. "She's going to execute on her timeline. Sealed warrants, controlled prosecutions, managed outcomes. Every corrupt official gets a deal that protects their useful parts. The network's financial architecture gets quietly absorbed instead of publicly dismantled." Rowan looked at her sister. "And nobody ever knows what it cost you, what it cost the people in those containers." Sienna looked back at her. Same jaw, same dark brows, same mouth. 3 years of different lives in the same face. "What do you want to do?" Sienna said. "I want to publish," Rowan said. "All of it, before Marsh executes. I have the C-word consolidated files from upstairs. I have 3 weeks of independently built financial sourcing. I have Carter Voss willing to go on record. I have you." She held her sister's gaze. "I need the names list. I need the routing map. Do you have access to what Marsh has?" Sienna was quiet for 3 seconds. Rowan watched the calculation move through her sister's eyes. Not doubt, not fear, something more disciplined than either. The calculation of someone who had been making operational decisions under extreme constraint for long enough that the process was automatic. "I have a copy," Sienna said. Roman made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "You have a copy," Rowan said. "I pulled it 18 days ago when I realized Marsh was running the secondary timeline. Digital copy, encrypted, stored on a device Marsh doesn't know I have access to." She looked at Roman. I was going to use it as leverage for my own extraction if Marsh tried to execute without pulling me out, but she stopped. But, Rowan said. But leverage for one person's extraction is not the same thing as publishing the truth, Sienna said. I know what Marsh's controlled prosecution looks like. I've seen the deal structures she was building. The people who finance this network, the ones who use their congressional seats to keep the Port Authority blind, they were going to walk away with administrative findings and undisclosed settlements. Her voice hadn't changed pitch, but something behind it had shifted, the way pressure shifts before a structure gives way. I spent 3 years inside this to watch that happen. I'm not doing that. If we publish before the warrants execute, Roman said, Marsh loses control of every outcome, including what happens to me. Both women looked at him. I have 6 years of cooperation feeding federal intelligence, he said. Marsh controls how that cooperation is characterized. If I'm outside her managed process when this breaks, she can frame my cooperation as self-serving. She can frame the intelligence I fed as incomplete or manipulated. She has enough to bury me and enough leverage over federal prosecutors to make it happen. He looked at Rowan. If you publish, I lose the protection my cooperation was supposed to buy. The dock was quiet. The vessel lights moved on the water. I know, Rowan said. He held her gaze. And you're asking me anyway. I'm not asking you, she said. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. What you decide is yours. She looked at him. This man she'd known for 11 days, married for 8, who had pulled her out of a warehouse where she was supposed to die and given her a name and a roof and pieces of truth she wouldn't have found any other way. I think you know what the right thing is. I think you've known for 6 years and you've been trying to find a way to do it that didn't cost you everything. And I think you've figured out by now that there isn't one. The silence held. Somewhere in the main building above them, voices. Roman's radio crackled once, a word she didn't catch. He looked up toward the stairwell, then back at her. There's a vehicle outside, he said quietly. North side. It wasn't there when we arrived. Her stomach dropped. He keyed his radio. North perimeter, report. A pause. North perimeter. No response. He looked at Decker. Something passed between them. A look she'd seen military veterans exchange in footage she'd reviewed for stories. The look of people who have processed a threat assessment simultaneously and arrived at the same conclusion. Marsh, Rowan said. She knew we'd come here, Roman said. She sent us here. How many? Decker said into his own radio. Static. Then a voice, broken by interference, saying a number that made Decker's face do the thing it had done when he'd shown them the photograph of the empty vehicles. Roman turned to Rowan. He turned to Sienna. He looked at them both. These two women with the same face who had arrived at this dock stairwell from completely different directions and were now standing in the same dark building with the same enemy closing in from the north. And he said, with the flat precision she'd come to understand was the most honest register he had, we have about 4 minutes before Marsh's tactical team is inside this building. Sienna was already on her feet. Her right shoulder was hurt, but she was moving with the compressed efficiency of someone whose body has been trained to override pain signals when the situation requires it. Rowan looked at the documents inside her jacket. She looked at her phone. She looked at her sister. The device with the copy, she said. Where is it? On me, Sienna said. Give it to me. Rowan, give it to me, she said. Because whatever happens in the next 4 minutes, if I'm the one holding it, it becomes a journalist's source material. It has a different legal protection than anything you're carrying as a former operative working outside handler sanction. She held out her hand. Give it to me, and let me do what I came here to do. Sienna looked at her for one long second. Then she reached into her jacket and put a small encrypted drive into Rowan's open palm. Rowan closed her fingers around it. Above them, on the north face of the building, something hit the loading door hard enough to rattle the frame. Then a second impact. Then the groan of metal giving way. Move, Roman said. They went up the stairwell fast. Sienna first despite her shoulder, moving with the muscle memory of someone who'd trained for exactly this. Then Rowan and Decker behind. The main floor of this cannery opened around them, and the work lighting was still strung along the central beam line, still burning, which meant anyone coming through the north loading doors would have light to work with, and so would they. The north loading doors were open. Both of them. The padlocks were gone. 6 figures in tactical gear came through in the staggered entry pattern of a trained unit. Not improvised, not rushed, the practiced movement of a team that had rehearsed this building's layout, which meant Marsh had the floor plan, which meant she'd had it before tonight. "Federal agents," a voice said, amplified. "Nobody moves." Roman's people had weapons up. Marsh's tactical team had weapons up. 12 people in a dead cannery with work lights swinging slightly in the draft from the open doors, and the specific, terrible stillness of a standoff where everyone in the room was calculating the same variables. Rowan stepped forward. "Don't," Roman said behind her. She stepped forward anyway. Into the lit rectangle, into the sight lines of 6 federal tactical agents and whatever was behind them in the dark of the loading threshold. A figure appeared in the doorway behind the tactical team. Not in gear. In a suit. Composed, precise. The posture of someone who had written the operational brief for this room and was watching it execute according to plan. Deputy Director Carolyn Marsh looked at Rowan across the cannery floor with the expression of someone encountering a variable they had assessed and discounted. "Ms. Mercer," she said, "step away from DeLuca." "I'm a journalist," Rowan said, "and I'm holding source material protected under federal shield law. If your people take me into custody, everything I'm carrying becomes the subject of a legal challenge that will be public record before morning." Marsh's expression didn't change. "You're in a crime scene." "I'm in a building where you sent me," Rowan said. "You sent the photograph. You set the 4-hour window. You needed us here so your tactical team could take the evidence and control the outcome." She held the encrypted drive up where Marsh could see it. "But I've had this for 6 minutes, and my editor has had a copy of everything I documented upstairs for 4. The silence in the cannery was absolute. Marsh looked at the drive. She looked at Rowan's face. She looked behind Rowan at Sienna, and something moved in her expression for the first time. Not fear, not anger, but the specific recalibration of a strategist who has just understood that the board has changed. "You can still control this," Rowan said quietly, "or you can let me publish it, and the public controls it. Those are the only 2 options left." Marsh said nothing. "The people in those containers deserve more than a sealed proceeding and an administrative finding," Rowan said. "You know that. You've always known that. It's why you built this operation in the first place." She didn't move. "Let me finish the story." The work light swung. The dock water moved against the pilings below. Carolyn Marsh looked at Rowan Mercer for a long time. Then she looked at her tactical team and said, very quietly, "Stand down." The tactical team lowered their weapons in sequence right to left, the way a wave pulls back from shore. Reluctant, incremental, leaving the ground changed after. Nobody spoke for 3 seconds. Then Roman DeLuca exhaled, and it was the first time Rowan had heard him make a sound that was purely involuntary. Not managed, not deployed, just air leaving a body that had been holding itself at maximum tension and had been given permission to release a fraction of it. Marsh walked forward through her team. She moved the way she'd always moved in the 2 interviews Rowan had conducted with her. Contained, deliberate, each step placed with the precision of someone who had learned early that how you crossed a room told people things about you that your words couldn't retract. She stopped 6 feet from Rowan and looked at the encrypted drive in Rowan's hand and then at Rowan's face. "You said your editor has a copy," Marsh said. "Yes." "What does that mean exactly? What does he have?" The C-word consolidated routing files from the table upstairs. "My 3 weeks of independently sourced financial documentation. Photographs of the documents you've been working with in the building your people purchased 8 months ago through the holding company that bought it from DeLuca." Rowan held her gaze. "And a recorded summary I dictated to a voicemail during the drive down here, detailing the sequence of events from the warehouse ambush through tonight, including your role in leaking my name to 3 criminal organizations." Marsh was very still. "That recording is not admissible as—" "I'm not building a legal case," Rowan said. "I'm building a story. Admissibility is your problem. Publication is mine." The 2 women looked at each other across 6 feet of cannery floor. Rowan was aware of everything in her peripheral vision. Roman behind her, Sienna to her left, Decker beyond Sienna, The tactical team spread across the north end of the building, the scattered remains of the table documents on the floor 30 feet away. She was aware of her own heartbeat, still elevated, and the weight of the encrypted drive in her closed fist, and the cold air coming off the dock below. Marsh said, "What do you want?" "I want you to open the sealed indictments," Rowan said. "All of them. Public filings, public record, no managed outcomes, and no undisclosed settlements. Every name on the list goes through a public proceeding." "That's not my decision alone." "Then you go back to whoever shares that decision with you," Rowan said, "and you tell them that the alternative is a front-page story that makes the decision for everyone." She paused. "I'm not trying to destroy your operation. I'm trying to make sure it actually does what you built it to do." "You don't know what I built it to do." "I know what it was supposed to do," Rowan said. "I know what it became." She glanced at Sienna briefly, and then back. "I know what it cost people who trusted you." Marsh looked at Sienna. It was the first time she'd looked directly at Sienna since coming through the doors, and whatever moved across her face in that moment was too complex and too fast for Rowan to fully read. Not guilt. Something older and more structured than guilt. The face of someone confronting the distance between what they intended and what they built. Sienna looked back at her former handler with the expression of someone who has already done all the feeling they're going to do about a particular thing and has arrived on the other side of it at something that isn't quite forgiveness and isn't quite condemnation. Something more like a door that has been closed and locked and will not be reopened. "I'll make the calls," Marsh said finally. She said it quietly without the composed authority she'd carried into the building. She said it like someone putting something down that had gotten very heavy. She turned and walked back through her tactical team and through the north loading doors into the dark outside. Her team followed. 12 seconds and they were gone, and the cannery was just a dead building again, the work lights swinging, the dock water moving below. Roman sat down on a piece of equipment housing that had been pushed to the wall. He sat with his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor, and it was the most unguarded Rowan had ever seen him. The architecture of management and control temporarily offline. Just a man in a cold building at 2 a.m. who had been running towards something for 6 years and had just arrived somewhere he didn't have a map for. She sat beside him. Not touching, just present. "She'll make the calls," he said. "Yes. And then federal prosecutors are going to spend 8 months deciding what to do about me." "Yes." He was quiet. He turned the situation over in silence, the way she'd watched him turn everything over, methodically, without panic, arriving at the shape of it before he spoke about it. 6 years of cooperation, he said, documented, verified, producing 3 sealed indictments that are now going public. He looked at his hands. "It won't be nothing. It won't be clean, but it won't be nothing." "No," she said. "It won't be nothing." They sat like that for a moment, the two of them, in a building that smelled like rust and salt, and the specific exhaustion of a night that had asked more than either of them had expected to give. Then Rowan stood up. She had a story to file. The next 4 months were the most complicated of Rowan's professional life, and some of the most clarifying of her personal one. She filed the first piece 8 days after the cannery. Marcus ran it on a Thursday morning with a 3-person legal review that had taken 6 days and aged him visibly. The story broke the routing map of the trafficking network in full. Every shell company, every cutout, every freight logistics connection, every port authority compliance failure, tracing the architecture from its operational roots in the Wilmington shipping infrastructure through its political financing chain to the congressional offices that had received protected payments. The names were in the story. All of them. The reaction was immediate and loud and took several directions simultaneously. 3 congressional offices issued denials within the first 2 hours. By the afternoon, 2 of those offices had walked the denials back. By the following morning, the 3rd had retained criminal defense counsel. The sealed indictments Marsh had been building unsealed over the following 3 weeks, triggered by the public exposure of the named individuals. Rowan covered each unsealing. She sat in federal courthouse press galleries and wrote the proceedings with the flat, precise attention to detail that had always been her best professional quality and that she had never needed more than now, when the temptation to let the story become personal was constant and the commitment to let it be accurate was the only thing that kept it from collapsing into something less than true. Carter Voss testified before a federal grand jury in the 6th week. He arrived with counsel, and he answered every question put to him. And Rowan knew this not because she attended, she didn't, but because his attorney released a statement afterward confirming his full cooperation, and because Carter himself called her the evening after and said, in a voice that was quieter than she'd ever heard from him, "I told them everything." She said, "Okay." He said, "I'm sorry, Rowan. I know that's so—" "Carter," she said. "I know." She paused. "It doesn't fix it, but I know." She hung up and sat in the small apartment she'd rented in Baltimore. Not the motel, not the brownstone, her own place. A third-floor walk-up with windows that looked onto a street she was learning. And she turned the phone over in her hand and felt the weight of 3 years she'd spent building a life with a man whose fear had been bigger than his decency until it finally, barely, hadn't been. She felt it, and then she set it down and went back to her laptop, because the second piece was due Thursday and she had 600 words left to write. Sienna came back in the 7th week. Not to Washington, not to any of the places her old life had been. She showed up at Rowan's apartment on a Tuesday evening with a duffel bag and the particular look of someone who has been traveling light for so long they've forgotten what it felt like to stop. Rowan opened the door, and they looked at each other across the threshold, and neither of them said anything for a moment because some reunions are too large for immediate language. Then Sienna said, "Can I stay for a few days?" And Rowan said, "Yeah, come in." They stayed up until 3 in the morning the first night. They sat on the floor of the living room with coffee and Rowan's reporting files spread between them, and they did not start with the hard things. They started with the small ones, the accumulation of 3 years' worth of ordinary life that they'd been unable to share. Sienna's apartment in a city she couldn't name. A dog she'd wanted to get and hadn't because it wasn't operationally practical. A restaurant she'd eaten at alone on her birthday in November because there was no one she could call. Rowan listened to all of it without filling the spaces with reassurance or minimizing language because she was a journalist and she knew how to listen, and because Sienna had spent 3 years in conditions that required her to make her own interior life very small, and what she needed most was for it to be allowed to be large again. Around 2 in the morning, Sienna said, "I didn't know about the wedding. I knew Carter was going to end the engagement. That was the plan. I didn't know he was going to do it like that. I didn't know he was going to make it public," Rowan said. "I would have warned you," Sienna said. "If I could have found a safe channel, I would have." "I know," Rowan said. "Do you?" Rowan looked at her sister, this woman who was her own face, 3 years older in ways that had nothing to do with time. And she said, "Yeah, I do," and meant it. Sienna exhaled. It was the same sound Roman had made in the cannery. Involuntary, unmanaged, a body releasing something it had been holding longer than was healthy. "I'm out," Sienna said. "I filed my separation paperwork last week. It's done." "What are you going to do?" Sienna looked at the files between them on the floor. The routing maps, the financial documentation, the printed copies of the grand jury coverage. "I spent 3 years learning how this network functioned from the inside," she said. "Every mechanism, every vulnerability, every place where the oversight architecture failed." She paused. "There are organizations doing victim recovery work, specifically for trafficking survivors. They need people who understand how the networks operate." "You'd be good at that," Rowan said. "I'd be useful," Sienna said, with the careful distinction of someone who had learned to be precise about the difference. "That's enough for now." They sat quietly for a moment, the two of them, in the small apartment with the city moving outside the windows and the coffee going cold between them. "The story ran well," Sienna said. "Yes. The second piece, too." "The third runs Thursday," Rowan said. "It's about the oversight failures. The specific mechanism by which the Port Authority compliance reports were buried. Who buried them, when, and what they received in exchange. Will it hold legally?" "Marcus and the legal team have been over it 4 times, Rowan said. "It holds." Sienna nodded slowly.
It's going to be loud. Yes. Are you ready for loud? Rowan thought about that.
About what loud looked like at this scale. Congressional hearings, hostile press briefings, the specific ugliness that arrived when powerful people were publicly exposed and turned their resources toward discrediting the person who had exposed them. She'd been through versions of it before, smaller versions, and she knew the texture of it. She knew what it cost. She knew that the first month after a story like this one broke was the worst, and that the second month was better, and that by the sixth month the story was part of the public record, and the people trying to bury it had usually moved on to trying to manage it, which was a different and less exhausting kind of fight. I've been ready for loud since I was standing at an altar in $4,000 of white silk with nowhere to go, she said. I think I'll manage. Sienna laughed. It was the first time Rowan had heard her sister laugh in 3 years, and it landed somewhere behind her sternum with the particular force of things you didn't know you'd been missing until you had them back. The Marchetti Caruso Syndicate's Baltimore leadership was arrested in the 11th week, on a Tuesday morning, on charges that included racketeering, conspiracy to commit human trafficking, bribery of federal officials, and obstruction of justice. The Veltri organization's leadership followed 6 days later. The Shen Collective's freight operation was dismantled through a coordinated multi-jurisdictional action that took 3 days and produced 22 arrests across 4 states. Marco Reyes entered a guilty plea in the 9th week. He cooperated. His cooperation was extensive, and it was, according to sources Rowan cultivated inside the prosecution team, the piece that allowed several of the later arrests to proceed with the evidentiary weight they needed. She did not write about Reyes with satisfaction. She wrote about him the way she wrote about everything, accurately, completely, without the editorializing that would have made the story smaller by making it personal. What Reyes had done was in the record. What the record said about him was enough. Carolyn Marsh resigned from her position in the Federal Oversight Division in the 8th week. She was not charged. The question of what she had done and what it had cost, and whether the architecture she'd built had ultimately served the purpose she'd built it for, was the kind of question that did not resolve cleanly, and Rowan did not pretend in print that it did. She wrote a piece in the 14th week that was the hardest thing she'd written in her career, harder than the routing map story, harder than the oversight failure piece, because it was the piece about Marsh, and it required her to hold simultaneously the truth that Marsh had used Rowan as an instrument in a plan that could have killed her, and the truth that the plan had also, in its broken and costly way, produced something that looked like justice for the people in those containers. She wrote the piece. She did not resolve the contradiction. She let it sit in the piece the way it sat in her, which was uncomfortably and permanently, and without the relief of a clean conclusion. Marcus called her after he read the final draft. He said, "This is the best thing you've ever written." She said, "I know." He said, "It's going to make people angry." She said, good." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You okay?" She looked out her window at the street below. It was late October. The leaves were going. The particular slant of the light at that hour on an autumn afternoon in Baltimore made everything look briefly like it was made of something more permanent than it was. The buildings, the cars, the people moving below, all of it edged with a quality of substance that the light would take with it when it went. "I'm okay," she said. And it was true, which surprised her less than she'd expected. Roman DeLuca appeared before a federal judge in the 13th week. His cooperation agreement, negotiated over 3 months of intensive back and forth between his legal team and the prosecution, produced a sentence of 18 months in a minimum security facility with credit for time served under house arrest during the negotiation period. The agreement also required a formal dissolution of the DeLuca organization's remaining operational infrastructure, overseen by a court-appointed compliance monitor, and the forfeiture of significant assets. He did not contest any of it. Rowan was not in the courtroom. She had made a decision early in the prosecution period that she would not cover the DeLuca proceedings directly, not because she couldn't, not because she lacked sources, but because the conflict between her professional obligation to accuracy and her personal stake in the outcome was large enough that she trusted her coverage less than she trusted someone else's. She had a colleague at the paper cover the sentencing. She read the piece when it ran, and it was good, and it said what the proceeding had said, and she was glad she hadn't written it. She went to see him 2 weeks after the sentencing at the facility, in a visiting room with plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting and the smell of industrial cleaning product that reminded her, distantly, of the hotel room where this had started. He was thinner. He'd always been lean, but there was less padding now between what he presented and what he was underneath it. He sat across the table from her and looked at her with the expression she'd come to think of as his baseline. Not warmth, not coldness, something functional and honest that existed below both. "You look like you've been working," he said. "I've been working," she said. "The Marsh piece was good." "I know." "You let her be complicated," he said. "A lot of journalists wouldn't." "A lot of journalists didn't spend 3 weeks nearly getting killed as part of her operational architecture stunts," Rowan said. "It turns out that getting close to something makes it harder to flatten." He almost smiled. Not quite. Close enough that she registered it. "The divorce paperwork came through," she said. "I saw." "I wanted to tell you in person." "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. "I wanted to." They were quiet for a moment. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone in the far corner of the room was having a conversation in a low voice, the words indistinct, the tone carrying the specific compressed intimacy of a conversation happening in a place that doesn't allow for privacy. "The shipping company," she said. "The legitimate operation." "My attorneys are finalizing the structure," he said. "It takes time when you're doing it from in here, but it's moving." "And the Victim Assistance Foundation?" "Same. The compliance monitor has approved the initial funding structure." He looked at his hands on the table, the same gesture she'd seen in the cannery, the brief downward look that was as close as he got to visible interiority. "My father had a plan, before the people around him built what they built. A shipping company, something that used the access and the relationships without the infrastructure of everything else." He paused. "I found the business plan in his papers after he died. Handwritten, 40 pages. He'd been working on it for years and never got far enough to execute it because the people around him needed the other thing more than they needed him to be legitimate." "You're going to build what he planned," she said. "I'm going to try," he said. "That's all I can say honestly." She looked at him across the plastic table in the fluorescent light and thought about the parking structure and the 11 days and the 4-minute ceremony and the encrypted drive in her closed fist in the cannery. She thought about what it meant to sit across a table from someone and understand the full weight of who they were. Not the version assembled for public consumption, not the version constructed as armor, the actual person underneath both, with all the damage and the discipline and the particular grief of someone who had spent a long time trying to build something better out of materials that weren't designed for it. "Roman," she said. He looked at her. "What you did, the 6 years, the intelligence, the cooperation, it mattered." She said it directly, the way she said things she meant. "I know the legal process is going to spend the next year deciding exactly how much it mattered, and in what official capacity. But I want you to know, from me, not as a journalist, just from me, it mattered. The people who are out of those containers because the network's infrastructure was exposed are out because of what you built from the inside." She held his gaze. "That's real. Whatever else is true, that's real." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face, not the grief she'd seen before, not the operational flatness. Something older and quieter than either. "Thank you," he said. He said it simply, without the precision he usually brought to language, which was how she knew he meant it without architecture around it. She drove back to Baltimore in the gray afternoon. The highway was mostly clear, the sky the particular white of a sky that can't decide whether to go dark or clear, and she drove with the window cracked and the cold air coming in and her hands loose on the wheel. She thought about the story. Not the pieces that had run, not the ones still in progress, not the third series she'd already started outlining about the systemic Port Authority oversight failures that had allowed the network to operate for so long. She thought about the story the way she'd thought about it in the cannery, when she'd called it a shield, and what it felt like now that it had been both weapon and shelter, both the thing that nearly got her killed and the thing that had kept her alive. She thought about standing at an altar in white silk 4 months ago with her hands empty and her life rearranging itself around her, and the cold precision that had settled behind her sternum when she'd looked at her sister's face and understood that something was wrong, and the way that precision had carried her through everything that came after. Not as numbness, not as the absence of feeling, but as the specific quality of attention that made feeling useful rather than consuming. She thought about what Marcus had said when she'd called him from the parking garage, still in the dress. "Do you have a place to stay?" She thought about the fact that the question had struck her as almost funny then, in the detached way that extreme situations produce their own black comedy, because she had not been thinking about where to stay. She had been thinking about a wire transfer and a shell company, and what the connection meant and how to build the story properly. She had not stopped thinking about that since. She pulled off the highway at her exit and drove through the familiar blocks toward her apartment, and the city had the quality it always had at dusk in October, closing in, lights coming on in windows, the day contracting toward its center. She parked. She sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. Her phone had 3 messages, one from Marcus about the Thursday piece, one from Sienna, a photograph. Not a surveillance photo, not a crime scene, just a picture of a coffee she'd bought herself at a place near whatever city she was in, captioned with the name of the city and a single period. Rowan looked at it and felt something in her chest that was warm and uncomplicated in a way that not much had been lately. She saved the photograph. The 3rd message was from a number she didn't recognize, which 6 months ago would have made her heart rate jump and now made her tilt her head and look at it with professional assessment rather than fear. She'd been through enough unknown numbers to have recalibrated what they cost her nervous system. She opened it. Story ran well, all 5 pieces. You did what you said you'd do. No signature. She didn't need one. She put the phone in her pocket and got out of the car. She took the stairs to the 3rd floor. She unlocked her apartment door and went in and turned the lights on and set her bag down and looked at the desk where her laptop was open. The next story already started, the cursor blinking in the middle of a sentence she'd been building in her head for the last 2 hours of driving. She sat down. She found the sentence where she'd left it. She kept writing. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do, moving, accumulating, generating the noise and heat and friction of human lives pressing against each other in close quarters, all of it messy and costly and irreducible to any single story no matter how carefully you built it. She knew that. She'd always known that. She wrote anyway. He was just... Gerald stopped. His throat moved. He said she'd already earned it and he was just settling the account. She looked at the tree for a long time. "Yeah," she said. "That sounds like him. On." The Roxbury Health Center broke ground in November. She was on site at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday with the project foreman and 2 structural engineers and a clipboard she didn't technically need because she had the drawings memorized, but which she carried because the physical presence of paper on a site was something she believed in the way other people believe in tools they can feel in their hands. The site was a cleared lot on a corner that had been a parking structure until 18 months ago, and before that a community center that had burned, and before that a neighborhood pharmacy that had been in the same family for 3 generations until it wasn't. The ground was cold and the air smelled like turned earth and diesel, and she stood at the center of the future footprint and thought about what would be here in 14 months, the load-bearing walls she'd designed, the circulation paths, the specific placement of windows to maximize light in the waiting rooms, because she'd sat in enough waiting rooms with bad light to know that it matters. That it matters to the person sitting in the plastic chair for 2 hours not knowing what the doctor is going to say, that the quality of the light in that room is a form of respect. Damien was there. He'd asked if he could come, and she'd said yes without ambiguity, which was itself a measurement of something. He stood off to the side, hands in his coat pockets, not trying to insert himself into the professional choreography of the site. He was good at that, at being present without requiring the room to organize itself around him. She'd stopped finding it surprising and started finding it reliable, which was a different thing. After the foreman's briefing, she walked over to where he was standing. 3 years, she said. He looked at her. 3 years, he confirmed. His monitoring arrangement. Patricia had gotten the information from the docket 2 months ago, and Avery had sat with the number and what it meant and what she wanted to do with it. "I want to be clear about something," she said. She was looking at the site, at the stakes in the ground marking the footprint, at the future shape of a building that didn't exist yet. What I'm doing here, she gestured at the lot, isn't contingent on you. I'm not building this because of what you're doing with your father's money. I had this project before I met you. I know, he said, and whatever we are, whatever this turns into, it doesn't change who I am professionally or what I'm working on. I know that too, he said. Quiet, not hurt by it, not performing, not being hurt, just hearing it and acknowledging it the way he acknowledged things that were true and fair. The Community Development Trust, she said, the one you established for the properties. Yes. You need someone to advise on the physical rehabilitation of those properties. She turned to look at him. Not me specifically, but someone with my training, someone who understands what a neighborhood needs structurally before it needs anything else. He looked at her. Are you recommending yourself? I'm recommending my father's firm, she said. Restructured, small, residential focus, helmed by a man who made mistakes and has specific knowledge of what happens when a community loses its physical infrastructure and has to rebuild it. She held his gaze. That's not charity. That's a correct use of available resources. He was quiet for a moment. The site noise moved around them. Heavy equipment, voices, the percussion of a project beginning. Send me a proposal, he said. I will. She looked back at the stakes in the ground. 3 years is a long time, she said. A lot can be built in 3 years. He didn't respond immediately. She'd learned that his silences were almost always productive rather than evasive, that he was doing something in them rather than avoiding something. I'd like to see what it looks like, he finally said, in 3 years, whatever we've made of it. She turned her head and looked at him. This man who kept his word and had managed what she found, and had sat in her father's chair and said her mother had already earned it. This man who wanted to build something that didn't require anyone to be afraid of him, who had looked at her across a restaurant table the first night and watched her with the quality of a person seeing something they'd been looking for without knowing its shape. She turned back to the site. Then don't give me a reason to leave before that, she said. It wasn't soft, and it wasn't hard. It was the exact weight of what she meant. I won't, he said. She believed him. Not because she was certain of him. She'd been certain of very little since the envelope arrived on a Tuesday, and a man in a charcoal suit stood on her father's porch, waiting to change the shape of everything. But she'd learned to distinguish between the certainty that comes from having enough information and the certainty that comes from knowing a person well enough to trust the pattern of their actions over time. She didn't have the first kind. She was beginning to have the second. That would have to be enough to start. She moved her own things out of the Dorchester house in December, not because she was giving up the connection to it, but because Gerald didn't need a caretaker anymore. And because her apartment in Jamaica Plain had been sublet for 3 months, and the subletter was asking about extending, and because when she sat at the drafting table in the window that faced the garden on Brookline's private road and worked in the morning light, the work was better than it had been in 3 years. She didn't frame that as a conclusion. She framed it as a data point. The oak tree in the garden at Brookline lost its leaves in November, the way the oak tree in her father's backyard lost its leaves. Gradually and then all at once, the way most significant things happened, the way a crisis became a life change and the way a stranger became something else through the accumulation of mornings and difficult conversations, and the willingness to stay in a room when leaving would have been easier. She put a photograph of her mother on the windowsill next to the drafting table. Not the surveillance photograph. She'd asked Damien for a copy, and he'd provided it, and she'd looked at it for a long time, and then filed it in the folder with the legal pad pages, and the task force file, and the contract with the exit clause on page 14. The photograph on the windowsill was one she'd brought from home, her mother at the kitchen table in Dorchester, laughing at something outside the frame, the winter light from the window turning everything warm. A woman who had been moved through 17 years of someone else's story without knowing it and had gone on to build a life of ordinary size and deep significance. Avery worked at the table, and the photograph was at the edge of her vision, and the garden changed as the weeks turned, and she let it change without trying to hold it in place. Some structures were meant to be built once and stood in for a long time. Some were meant to be revised, knocked back to the load-bearing elements, examined at the level of what actually holds, rebuilt from what had proven capable of bearing weight. She was 34 years old, and she was revising. It was slow work. It was the best kind. In January, her father signed the first contract with the Moretti Community Development Trust, a residential rehabilitation project in Dorchester, 6 units, 6 families, a building that had been vacant for 11 years and was structurally sound in its bones, if not in its surfaces. Gerald Bennett would oversee it himself, on site, with his hands back in the work he'd started doing before debt and desperation and a decade of poor decisions had taken him somewhere unrecognizable. She drove him to the site on the first morning. She walked the building with him, room by room, pointing at what was solid and what needed replacing, listening to him start to find his professional voice again. The voice he'd had when she was a child, watching him talk about structures with the enthusiasm of a man who genuinely believed that what people lived inside shaped what they were capable of becoming. She believed that too. She'd always believed it. It was why she'd become what she'd become. They stood in an empty room on the second floor with winter light coming through a broken window and sawdust from the preliminary work on the floor around their feet. And her father put his hand on a wall and said, "This one's good. This one's been holding since the 40s. "I know," she said. "I checked." He looked at her, at his daughter, who had walked into a crisis he'd created and had not forgiven him instantly, or pretended that forgiveness was the same as healing, but had helped him anyway, because that was what you did with people you loved who had failed significantly. You made them earn the next version of the relationship, one action at a time, and you stayed close enough to watch them try. "Avery," he said. "I know, Dad." He put his arm around her shoulders, briefly, the way he had when she was small. She let him. They stood in the room with its broken window and its solid wall and the light coming through the gap like something that had been waiting for the damage that let it in. Outside, the city moved around them in its ordinary, loud, indifferent way. Buildings going up and coming down, streets being repaved and torn up again. The daily maintenance of a place that exists in continuous revision, never finished, always becoming, held together by the things inside it that have proven over time that they can bear the weight. She pulled out her clipboard. She uncapped her pencil. She got to work.